Chapter 3. Discussion between enemies/friends. En wanted to go back to bed as soon as he could, so hopefully things could be set right and he could go back to doing practically nothing in the Vestige plane. But his dreams were cut short when the stupid blonde boy refused to move out of the bed, despite it being the comfier of the two options. And he was a pro hero. Maybe not now, but he totally deserved the bed more. "Get off," he said, shoving the boy back to readjust. The boy scoffed, shoving him a lot harder. Curse stupid child arms. En went stumbling off the edge of the bed to land directly on his tailbone. "Fuck," he mumbled, standing up slowly. He turned to see the blonde boy staring directly at him. "That's a bad word," he said slowly. "Ah, shit. Right. Kid. Ow?" En tried to correct himself, but the boy's face broke out into a wide grin. "I'm telling Mom," the boy declared, jumping out of the bed and running to the door. Little shit. En could not be found out until he could figure out how to get the ninth his body back and speak to Yoichi. The old man was smarter than all of them, whether he liked it or not, and now the brat was going to blow his cover because he cursed. Give him a fucking break, huh? En ran after the boy, tackling him to the floor. "What are you?" the boy asked as En fought him to the floor, kicking his knees and pinned him down. "Get off me, Izuku," the boy yelled, but En didn't move. Unfortunately for him, this small body was a lot less weight than he was used to, but he had taken down much bigger heroes during his time. "Don't tattle," En said, still pressing down on the boy, not letting him get up. "Okay," the boy yelled at En, so En stood off of him, sighing. "I don't like sad you," the boy grumbled, wiping his knees. "And I don't like you," En said, simply shrugging. The boy stared at him, mouth agape, opening and closing like a fish. En almost made a comment about it before he heard footsteps outside the door. He grabbed the stupid brat's arm and dragged him to the bed, shoving him into it. He grumbled, climbing in beside and throwing the blanket up. "What?" En covered his mouth with his hand, shaking his head. "Ew," he screamed, pulling his hand back and wiping it on his shirt. He was going to wring a kid's neck right now. The door flew open and he quickly shut his eyes, hoping Kachan would have the decency to do the same. "Boys, what was that fighting?" the blonde woman asked, and En shook his head no slightly. "Izuku said a no-no word," Kachan said, sitting up quickly and pointing to En. "Yep, that was it." En shoved at the boy, pushing him out of the bed. He didn't know how he was supposed to act, but he was not snuggling up with a child. He didn't want to wind up on a registry. "Whoa, Izuku!" the blonde woman yelled, picking him up off the bed. Curse this stupid body. He should have been able to whip this woman around. Kachan stared at him in shock, rubbing his jaw. "Why don't we sleep in separate rooms tonight?" the woman said, holding En tightly. He crossed his arms, flipping the boy off where the woman couldn't see. "You're mean," Kachan said, standing up and rubbing his arm. "Tattletale," En said as the woman set him down, staring at him. "I know you're upset right now, but you can't just push people or curse Izuku," the woman said, sitting beside him on the bed. "Oh God, another lecture. You need to take a deep breath and walk away if something is bothering you. Violence doesn't solve anything. It's not like you to act out like that." En bit his lip to stop himself from calling the woman a name, climbing into bed. He could totally pass all of this off as him just being upset since his dad died. That was Yoichi's issue to figure out. He pulled the blanket up, ignoring the woman's heavy sigh as he tucked himself lower. "Come on, Katsuki," she said, leading the boy out of the room and closing the door. Finally, some peace and quiet to figure out how to sleep. "Oh, what the fuck was that?" Hikage asked, smacking En's head the second he was back in his seat. "Of all the idiotic things to do, you beat up a boy." En shrugged, rubbing his head as he flipped Hikage off. "Not my fault the kid was a tattle." "God, you really are like a child," Hikage mumbled, rubbing his eyes. En went to respond to the old man, but he was cut off by Yoichi. "That was less than ideal, Six, but there is nothing we can do to change it." "So, what do we do?" Kudo asked, trying to make sure everyone stayed on track. Daigoro chimed up, not at his seat where he should be. "What do we do about the kid?" he called, and En stood up to get a better look at where he was. Daigoro was sat on a mat with a kid, piles of blocks and trucks around them. Ah, hell no, he said, moving over to them with his hands in his pockets. What the fuck is going on? The kid looked up at him with wide eyes, and he grumbled, rubbing his eyes. You said a no word, the kid yelled, pointing up at him. Daigoro laughed out loud, rubbing the boy's green curls, and flipped him off. Sixth, please sit. En didn't move, glaring down at the kid, who had seemingly forgotten about his appallment just a second before. I ain't taking care of this one, he said loudly. I will, Daigoro chimed in, raising a hand. Kid's fun. En groaned, shaking his head as he looked around at the other members of their table. They all looked equally as hopeless as he felt. Kuro was tending to Yoichi as always, Bruce staring at the two jealously. Daigoro was enraptured by the kid, and Hikage rested his chin on his hand, tired. The only one who had a different look was Nana. Seventh, he said, glaring at his successor. You know what is happening. She looked at him in shock, shaking her head. I don't know what you mean, she said quickly as everyone turned to look at her. Nana, he said, and Yoichi and his two admirers shot him a look. He waved it off, looking at his successor. I trained you for years. I know when you are lying or have something to hide. She looked away, cursing under her breath. Okay, maybe I do know who the kid is, or have an idea, she added quickly. She didn't say anything else despite his pointed stare. Seventh, who is the ninth? Yoichi asked in his usually tired voice. She groaned, standing up and walking around the table. She knelt beside the kid, taking a crayon from his hand. Since when did he have crayons? Izuku-Midoriya, that is your name, right? She asked softly. En could feel the first three shift uncomfortably at a real name, but none of them spoke. Yep, the kid responded happily, sliding a page over to Nana. How do you know? He tipped his head, his messy green curls falling into his face. I'm a friend, she said softly, moving a strand away. The kid didn't move away, giggling softly. Do you know your father's name? The kid's face twisted into something like disgust as he nodded. Yeah, he's dead though, the kid said, as if he didn't just have to deal with the funeral. I mean, En was really the one who was screwed and who dealt with it. What is his name? Nana asked softly, coloring a corner of the page. Yagi Tosha... The kid hesitated slightly. Something, he finally said. Nana nodded, her lips pressed tight. Yagi Toshinori. The kid giggled and nodded, kicking his feet as he returned to his coloring. You've got to be kidding me, Hikage whispered, rubbing at his eyes as they all stared at the smiling kid. Maybe they weren't allowed to use their real names in this plane, but they weren't stupid. They knew all of their names, including the current one. 8. En walked up behind his successor and slapped her upside the head, his other hand tightening in a fist. You fucking idiot, he screamed, his anger rising. All it had done was rise. Of all the inane, stupid things you've done, giving the quirk to that quirkless nobody was the worst possible thing. Do you know what you've done? Because that child went and knocked up a girl just to pass his quirk on? No one stopped him as he scolded his successor, a sign of respect. They may all be here now, but she was still his just as he was Daigoro's, who simply looked away. Nana stood up slowly, the side of her face slightly red as she looked him in the eyes. You do not have any right to scold me for a mistake that is not mine, she said, her voice tight. En laughed slightly, shaking his head at the pure audacity she had. This is all. He was cut off as a kid. The brat grabbed his hand, holding it tight. He tried to pull away, but the kid held tighter, shaking his head. He should have had the strength, but for some reason the kid was stronger than him. No fighting, he yelled, tears in his eyes. Yoichi stood, and his two puppies took his arms, helping him over to them. 6. Go, calm down. You have done enough already. We will figure this out. En scoffed, finally managing to free his hand from the kid, who glared at him while wiping tears away. You should have told us, he said to Nana before walking away. Maybe I wanted to protect my successor, she responded to his back. He bit his lip to keep from talking, sitting down in his chair. He knew his anger issues were bad, but to think she would hide something of this magnitude? He shook his head and shut his eyes, taking a deep breath as he let himself drift away. What does this mean for the kid? Daigoro asked, rolling a ball back and forth with the kid. Either this kid was super resilient, or he literally did not care he had just stopped En from hitting Nana again. Nana herself sat beside them, looking extremely conflicted. He's his through blood, not marriage, she clarified, rubbing the red part of her face. Yoichi sighed, nodding as he leaned into Kuro. I assumed as much. We tried to give our holder space, but it seems we gave him too much. The others moved, many sitting down on the mat beside them. It wasn't until Yoichi coughed, an awful-sounding thing, that the kid looked up. You should sit, he said simply, frowning. Yoichi smiled softly, waving his hand. I am all right, son. To move a chair too far in this plane is exhausting. He was the only one who knew. The rest of them did not have the power to edit anything in this field, everything left up to Yoichi. It was why he was so sickly despite being here far longer than all of them. The kid blinked, tipping his head slightly. What about that one? He asked, giggling slightly as he pointed to a plush chair behind Yoichi, which was definitely not there a second ago. Yoichi took the change in stride, nodding and sitting down. Bruce and Kudo stood on either side. Thank you, Yoichi said, nodding at the kid. He giggled, looking back at the ball and rolling it towards Daigoro. You're silly. I didn't do it. Yoichi nodded, tapping his leg. Would you come sit with me? He asked softly, his voice hoarse. The kid hesitated before nodding, standing up and wiping off his All Might pajamas. The sheer number of All Might things now in the Vestige plane was ridiculous, from plushes to posters and coloring pages. This kid was a next-level fanboy for his own father, which was to be expected. Do you know where you are? Yoichi asked, letting the kid adjust on his lap. The kid shook his head, messing with a small All Might keychain. I need to ask you what happened when your dad was in the hospital. What did he give to you? The kid looked up at him, his eyebrows furrowing. How did you know? We can see things here, Yoichi explained, holding the child up as he leaned back into him, like a big TV. The kid grinned, nodding as he snuggled closer into Yoichi, who was suddenly extremely sweet-looking instead of his usually sickly power. He told me not to tell anyone, the kid said seriously. This is difficult to explain, but we need you to tell us, Kudo spoke up, kneeling down to look the kid in the eyes. You could be in danger. The kid shook his head, crossing his arms stubbornly. No, I want my cake and All Might. All Might? Hikage asked, shifting. Kiddo, you know who that is, right? Yeah, the kid shouted way too loudly that Yoichi flinched slightly. He's the coolest hero in the world. I want to be just like him when I get my quirk. The kid's wide grin and loud voice did not fit in with the usual seriousness that they all had here. Didn't you say your dad was dead, though? Bruce asked, raising an eyebrow. The kid jumped down, his lips pressed tight. Everyone waited for an answer, but the kid didn't give it, taking a plush and moving away from them all. The mat moved with him, most of them ending up on the cold, concrete-like floor. Good going, third, Kudo said, a small grin on his face. Yoichi sighed, stopping the squabbling between the two before it could even start. There are things going on here that even I don't know. Clearly his blood relation to our quirk has made him more powerful than others. Nana shook her head. Look, he clearly doesn't know, and we shouldn't be the ones to tell him. Why not? It's not like anyone has any experience with this, Hikage chimed in. Because he's a child, Nana said seriously. He doesn't have any more information than us. Didn't you have kids? Daigoro asked, looking over at them. Her gaze narrowed, hands tightening as she shook her head. That was before I got the quirk. I wasn't aware you guys knew about them. She looked at her lap, biting her lip as she shook her head slightly. Daigoro let her sit, standing up slowly. Whatever the cause for his joinement to the power, we need to find our quirks, and beat the crap out of 8 when we do. He cracked his knuckles, grinning at Hikage, who laughed slightly. No, Yoichi said, shaking his head. We just need to focus on the new holder. Kudo took his arm as he stood up, Bruce supporting his back. What do you mean? Hikage asked, jumping as the kid suddenly appeared in front of them, looking him directly in the eyes. He scrambled backwards, standing up as the kid watched him closely. How do you get that? The kid asked, moving closer to Hikage. He pointed to Hikage's scars, his lip pressed tight. A villain, he said simply, still trying to move back as the kid kept walking forward. Nana seemed to shake out of her thoughts, standing up and taking the kid's shoulders in her hand. Do you know how to wake up? She asked, turning the kid around to look at them. The kid's brows furrowed as he shook his head. I don't want to. But you need to, she said softly, holding his hands. Daigoro stood up, stretching as he popped his neck. Yoichi had reached the edge of the platform, staring out into the nothingness only he could see. Hikage looked frankly exhausted, returning to his own seat at the table. No, the kid said loudly, biting his lip. Nana's grip tightened on the kid as Daigoro went to stand beside them. Izuku, I need you to try. I don't wanna, he screamed, stomping his foot. Daigoro barely managed to catch Nana as she went flying back, the ground moving away from the kid. He needs to wake up, Kudo yelled as the light in the plane started flickering and changing to unnatural colors. Izuku, Nana screamed, trying to get to him, but the ground kept shifting, pushing them all away as the child screamed for no apparent reason. Daigoro spun his head around as a loud cracking sound rumbled through the plane. The table split in half. En fell forward limply, still in his own plane. 4. Get him, Daigoro yelled as another wave pulsed through the room. Get him under control, Bruce screamed, holding Yoichi tight as he worked on something none of them could see. Nana pushed forward again, Daigoro helping to balance her as the floor continued cracking and shifting, toys getting thrown everywhere. We're trying, Daigoro yelled, taking another step. You can't make me, the kid screamed, his voice echoing through the plane in a bolt of green light. Daigoro clutched his chest, falling to his knees as something tore through him. He could hear a quiet curse from Hikage, and the others as well, their breathing all growing heavy. He blinked, the feeling dissipating just as fast as it had come on. He looked around, the floor returning to its normal state. The table repaired as En finally shifted slightly, woken by Hikage. The kid stared at them with wide eyes, clutching an All Might plush that had suddenly appeared in his arms. 7th, Daigoro called, Nana no longer beside him. The kid took a step backward, tears running down his face as he buried the bottom half into his plush. I didn't mean to, he whispered, biting his lip. What did you do? Bruce asked, walking over to the kid. The kid shook his head, taking a step away from them. Yoichi sighed heavily, and Bruce returned to his side, assisting Kudo in moving him to his chair at the table, since the plush one had vanished. This will be a learning curve for us all, Yoichi said quietly as the black view around them changed. The room from last night came into view as the viewer sat up, looking around the room. But it wasn't the kid. He was still just staring at them, clutching the stuffed plush. Ah, shit, En said, rubbing his eyes. Good luck to her. Okay, so I don't think I have too much to say about this one. As for how the vestige plane works, I'll kind of explain it, but a brief one would be, it's kind of just like a vague nothingness that goes on forever. Like, they have a floor, but it's not really a floor, it's just kind of there, just something solid for them to be on. And in the middle is the table with all the chairs around. That's really all they have in it. There's not much that changes because, as explained, Yoichi only has the power to do it since he has the strongest connection to the quirk. But even then, with his already, sick, because the quirk is kind of what made him sick versus his already, genetic thing. So he can't do too much. What he can do, though, is he can change the view from, like, the vague gray nothingness to whatever the viewer is seeing. And in that, it's kind of like a 360 all around. Really, like, strange setup, but that's kind of how it works. And I kind of explained how that lends itself into the quirk as well. But he can do that, and then he can kind of see out into the nothingness, but what he sees I haven't really explained, so I'm not going to. But the rest really don't have any power. So when they do go to sleep, they kind of go into their own worlds, memories, kind of like a dreamlike state, but not really. It's a little difficult to explain since, they're all dead and it's kind of just a part of them. When they do go to fronting, their chair then just gets filled with a smoke-like form of themselves, like, how Toshinori's is a smoke-like form? Well, that's because he's alive still. So, and it's kind of a placeholder. So when they switch out and they front, which is what I call it, they kind of become the smoke-like form because they're not really there. They're only there in essence. And Izuku will learn eventually, but, you know, he's a kid dealing with a lot, so why not just hide out in the vestige plane? Anyways, thank you guys so much for listening.